Meeting comes to order. Welcome to the November 5th work session. I'm going to be leading the pledge tonight. I haven't had an opportunity to do it in a while, board members, so with your indulgence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Miss Joyce was telling me about that. Yeah. Okay, we'll wait on the moment of silence till tomorrow night. And any questions regarding the agenda? Hearing none. Any questions regarding the consent agenda?
Mr. Chairman, pardon me, catching up here. On the agenda, we've been given a heads up, and we've got emails from a visitor who's already filed forms to speak on Thursday night. And because we've got a heads up on that, I know it's customary that we hold comments until the end of the meeting. I was thinking about being prepared to make whatever kind of response right there at that same time, and I just didn't want to catch anybody off guard with that here in the work session. I thought I'd bring that up and discuss it.
Thank you, sir. I've been trading emails back and forth with the gentleman who's going to speak. I've always also talked with Mrs. Bell, who will be here tomorrow night for the other presentation. So it's okay with you, Mr. Odom, and the rest of the board members, if there's any conversation or response, especially with Ms. Bell, we'll just go ahead and get that out of the way and move on, if that's okay with the rest of the board. I think this gentleman has spoke to us before, so I don't see it being a long, any kind of course we won't have a debate, but I think Ms. Bell can pretty much square us away and inform us of the transition issue. So.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Sorry about that. Out of order.
Okay. Spotlight, and of course, tomorrow night. Mr. Odom, you're going to do the report card tomorrow?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I guess we're ready for number 9.
Number 9 is under facilities, and this is the Stewart's Creek Middle School Soccer Scoreboard. Principal LaTony Murray has requested permission to purchase and install a scoreboard in the Stewart's Creek complex at the soccer field that is utilized by Stewart's Creek Middle and Stewart's Creek High boys and girls soccer teams. The scoreboard will be funded, purchased, and installed by Stewart's Creek Middle and High schools at an estimated cost of $4,500, and the electrical will be installed by Rutherford County Schools Maintenance Department. Recommend approval. The motion to approve Stewart's Creek Middle School scoreboard request as presented. Mr. Clardy's checked that out and that sort of thing. I thought it was interesting there and good that you have high school and middle going together on this. It's a good thing.
Any question from the board? Okay, I guess we'll move on to policy revision.
Okay, this is the policy revision. It comes, of course, from the policy committee, which you're part of. The first one is policy 1.704, charter schools. Purpose of the revision: to comply with state law allowing 30 days rather than 15 days for a charter school sponsor to submit an amended application after denial of an initial charter school application. In policy 5.402, which is for hepatitis B, purpose of the revision is to add behavior intervention teachers and educational assistants to the list of employees who are at high risk of exposure. Of course, this is the one where we pay for their immunization on. Policy 5.302 is sick leave. The purpose of this revision is revised confusing language allow an additional bereavement day for employees and include a provision for a classified sick leave bank, which, if you remember, was allowed by statute now. In policy 5.304, long-term leave of absence, the purpose of this revision includes provisions requiring a physician statement for extension of long-term leave and clarifying the length of time long-term leave may be granted. In policy 5.303, personal and professional leave, purpose of this revision is to delete the portion of the policy setting forth the amount of personal leave for employees. The designated amount for leave for employees will be included in an administrative procedure. And policy 6.411 is student wellness, and the purpose is to add a provision encouraging activity for students. Policy 5.104 under supervision, purpose of this revision is to add provisions requiring employees to report being indicted as a perpetrator of child abuse by the Department of Children's Services, and requiring teachers to report notice that a teaching license has been flagged by the Tennessee Department of Education for any reason. Policy 1.806, which is advertising and distributing materials in the schools, the purpose of this revision is to add an exception to allow schools to sell advertisements in the form of ads and or signs as fundraisers for school programs and or interscholastic athletics. And then the motion will be to recommend approval. Motion to approve the revisions of policies 1.704, 5.402, 5.302, 5.304, 5.303, 6.411, 5.108, and 1.806 on first reading as recommended by the Policy Committee.
Of course, the board attorney and staff attorney are present in case anyone has any question that they didn't think of the other day when we were going through these. Anybody have anything? Okay, we'll move on to number 11.
Number 11, Mr. Snell's prepared this for us. It's some interesting information, for information only. The Transportation Department has budgeted 6 buses for 2014-15, this additional buses. We've put on 5 buses through October. This brings us to a total fleet of 242 buses. We've exhausted the first priority list and currently are at number 13 out of 63 contractors on the second priority list. Buses are traveling a total of 18,122 miles per day, which equals to 362,440 miles per month, or 3,624,400 miles per year. This year, we're utilizing the iNow student database, and that's the attendance database that you talked about earlier, to track students who ride a bus. This requires each school to identify those students and input their bus information. As of the end of September, we're showing 26,257 students are assigned to buses that live 1.5 miles or further from school and are being transported each day. At the end of the 2013-14 school year, we showed transporting 25,280 students. We have also transported 115 Atlas Academic Time Leads to Achieving students and Rutherford County Schools Assistance Program for Families in Transition through the end of October compared to 103 in 2013. We've had 4 accidents with 5 injuries so far this year compared to 9 in 2013 with 1 injury. All buses are equipped with video surveillance, which is used by schools, the Transportation Department, and bus drivers to identify individuals and actions involving misconduct. We've pulled 147 videos from buses through the month of October compared to 106 in 2013. And Mr. Snell is here. If you have a question or comment, something you'd like to.
The increase of 147 over the 106, were those incidents on the buses or traffic, people running the stop sign, or? Oh, I thought there was one outside too.
System that would allow us to do that. But there needs to be a change in the state statutes to prosecute those, to make it sends that person whose license plate isn't signed. A notice or a letter stating you were noted as running a stop sign on the bus. And then, further about how unsafe that is and all, but there's no penalty attached to that. So these 147 are just incidences that have occurred, that we pull for whatever reason. Student says this happened, the bus driver said this happened. The truth is in the video. That number is the number that's in the computer that they can write. Now, whether or not that is the number that actually write each day, it's probably the same number that go to school. Whatever that percentage is of the actual enrollment numbers that actually students who ride the bus each day. I tell you what, on 3-hour and 15-minute day, they seem to all ride the bus in the afternoon because mom and daddies aren't home. And those days are really a test for us with regards to being able to get them all on the bus and to get them home, because a lot of times parents forget that they're out of school that day early.
There's another acronym, we were talking about that the last one, called ADT, Average Daily Transported. So the software system, the attendance system, what he's talking about, you put in the bus number, and whether they ride, sometime you'll have a student just ride morning, sometime you had afternoon, some will be both days, but it then calculates, if that student's absent, you do not get that ADT for that kid that day. So that's funding, that's how it's tracked. And the reason we got to get it in the attendance system is because the state is going to everything online with their e-plan and everything. So to get credit for it, we have to be able to electronically transmit it to them.
All right, we'll move to general discussion by board members. Anybody have anything?
I've got a question to Mr. Odom, if it's okay. Had a gentleman ask me this week what our process was of hiring principals, or what your process is of hiring principals. And if you can just give me a general outline, because I didn't know how to answer that. Okay. And is it the same for assistants as it is for principals?
A little bit different on it. When we have a principal vacancy, we post it for 10 days, right, Paula? I think it is 10 days we post for principals. And then we have job descriptions, certain minimum requirements for that in the site. Then we have a review committee, which consists usually of a teacher in the school, sometimes a parent, usually somebody from instructions, typically Mr. Zago, Ms. Barnes chairs most of them from HR. And it would be 5, 6, 7 people that will do the interviews. The questions for the interviews are a collection of questions, and some of them will come from Ms. Barnes, some of them will come from instruction. We very often now do things like pull a graph or information out of the Tennessee value-added system and say, this is a school, this is a report. If you were a principal, how would you address this? What is this report saying to you? How would you address it? So we go through that process, which takes some time. When we get an application, we may have 15 people, or you may have 30 or 40 apply. So we will go down and then start looking at it. We're able to go online and take a look very often at that person's name. We do some background checking. If it's from Tennessee, we can go into the state system, look at their certification, verify it. They've submitted a resume, obviously, and other things, but we can verify that. I very often will also go in and look if they're at another school or have been at another school recently. I'll go in and look at their state report card for that school and see. And if you can see it for 2 or 3 years, you can see whether there's been growth, not growth, or how that school is performing, you know, looking at that. And then after that process, the committee then usually ranks at least the top 3, 4, or so people that's involved. And then it comes back to me again, which in most cases I will bring them back in for a second interview with some additional questions that I might ask to hear them say again, looking at, I can at that time see what the other committee has recommended. And I would say, I really don't think there's been a case where it's either been first or second place or something from the committee. I'll come to basically the same conclusion they do when you see that. So I will miss one point, I guess. When we look and do all this search on backgrounds, and we may reduce the 30 or 40 down to 8 or 10 that we'll actually bring in for the interview of your top candidates or something like that. Assistant principals are a little bit different. We allow principals first shot at recommending somebody for that position. They do the same process. They look at people, turn in names. They then have to call me and say, I'd like to do this person. I'd like to move from a teaching position to administrative position. Well, they already know one of the things that I do, I have access to look at the Tennessee Value Added System. So I'll go in and look and see, is this a level 5 teacher, level 4 teacher, or whatever it is. And if I don't see somebody's average or above in there, then I'll usually call the principal up and say, look, because assistant principals also evaluate teachers and go in and give feedback on instruction. I said, if you're going to have somebody give feedback on instruction, I'd rather it be somebody that's 4 or 5 themselves to do that. So, but they know that now, so they've done all those checks. You know, by the time it gets to me, they know what they're looking at, and they've already checked the background of that person too. So if that's okay, then I'll tell them, yes, you can go ahead and sign off on that. We'll do other things, suggestion to them, you know, to try to keep some balance in there where we can. Very often, if you've got one male assistant, do you need a female assistant to kind of balance that off? They look for things like that, you know, in dealing with it. It's interesting now that a number of those, I was doing an evaluation over at Riverdale yesterday and was talking about I was talking to one of the things we have to do is interview the assistant principal about the school and that sort of thing and all. And they talked about their different skill sets. So principals very often may look for somebody from a math area, somebody from a social studies area, you know, or one of the other disciplines. If you're like in a high school where you got 4, they like some diversity in that so that, and what they'll do when they're doing their PLCs, they'll assign as one of the assignments to those assistant principals to work with the departments in which they came from or that academic discipline which they came from and all. And it's really tough in the high school because you got all those foreign languages, because you got CTE from so many backgrounds and all. But take it very seriously. I mean, it's one of those things that you're investing in them and you're depending upon them to provide feedback to improve instruction and your scores. So, you know, as I tell them all the time, you know better than the people you employ. So it's a process that starts with the person making an application through our website, turning it in, and electronically they can do it, and then they turn in the paperwork. You have to sign paperwork saying that you have not, you don't have any criminal history or background, that sort of thing. So we have a process before we kind of get down to that committee thing. So, any other question or?
No, that pretty much.
You want to serve on a screening committee sometime? We put people on it. We'll give you a chance.
I'd really rather not.
Okay.
I would like to thank your staff, though, because the last 2 months, they've been very helpful. When I ask a question, they came up with an answer, and I appreciate them teaching me. Thank you.
And administrators are year-to-year basis, is that?
You are. You don't have tenure as an administrator or a coach or a director of schools or any of a number of other positions like that. When you get really above teaching positions, there's not, you may have tenure in the system as an educator, but you would not have tenure in that position.
Mr. Chairman, before we meet again, this is our last work session before we'll meet with the legislative delegation. And I was interested in other board members' thoughts, and I know just as I was heading down here, there was another email that came my way that described the meeting as a very informal affair. I noticed that and thought, I guess I was thinking I was going to be kind of formal, maybe even aggressive in some of my questions. But in the work session type of setting, I wanted to maybe hear from other board members. I know I have a specific concern. I feel like that there's a separation between the standards that we're asking to be taught and the testing that we are using at the end of the process. And I know that Mr. Odom and I have discussed this, and we're taking steps locally in order to address that circumstance. But I think it's a circumstance that is specifically and directly tied to legislative action, where standards have been adopted in a legislative manner, and then testing has been delayed in a legislative manner. And the result is that there is a disconnect between those two very vital elements. I know that there'll be some mention of this in your report card presentation, Mr. Odom. You've already shared that with me. But that's one of the key things that I think we have to highlight to our legislators, that those two elements need to be in agreement.
The state board actually adopts your standards. That's an action of the State Board of Education. They go through and they have a vote on whether to adopt them or not. There's a process of review and all too. Typically the legislature, I've never known them to do that. I guess they could. They got the power, but they don't usually adopt standards. They've delegated that to the State Board of Education. And I think the part on the testing or assessment, it's the purse strings and the monies, associated with that. They did instruct the State Department of Education to go out for bid, not to use PARC, if you remember, which was the one that was the Common Core one that came down. And so the State Board of Education went through an RFP process for an assessment to start the 15-16 school year. And my understanding was the process, when they wrote the requirements, the RFP for that, then the State Department of Education, based on what they're saying, they kind of turn it over to the State Procurement Office, which takes bids for all sorts of things in dealing with that. So the State Procurement Office has recommended, the one they recommended is not Smarter Balance, it's Measurement Inc. Measurement Inc. Is a North Carolina company. They have, people will know Measurement Inc. because they have the one for a number of years that have conducted the writing assessments for us. Going back sometime, when kids do writing and turn it, even when we were doing it by hand on paper where they wrote it out, we had a number of teachers and people from Rutherford County and retired educators that actually served on those grading process. They train people. You have at least two people read, and they have to be within 1 or 2 points of each other, before they give the score and all to do that. So they have some history with the state. And I'm not positive about this, but I'm not sure Measurement Inc. is not the company now that's actually posting the state report card up for the state of education. It's collecting the data, and that's another contract thing to do. So, if that goes through, it will be Measurement Inc. Now, the state told us that Tennessee law says that your test had to be a fresh, non-redundant assessment. So, which meant you can't take the same group of questions and ask them again another year. So Tennessee owns the standards that's on our TCAP and our EOC assessments. So they had enough questions left over from their pool of questions that had not been used that the assessment for this 14-15 school year will be questions that the state owns that are for math and English language arts and science, that sort of thing. So that'll be the questions used. It'll be pretty much SPIs, with student performance indicators. I'll try to get over this. Student performance indicators, which are standards that have been in place for a number of years, will be the test this year. Be very similar to what you've seen for the last 2 or 3. The state did tell us, Mr. Zago and I went to a local meeting where the state people made some presentation with that. They do not have questions that will let them do another test. They will have to go out to bid for somebody to create another group of questions to be used from that. And they threw out some very big figures to create that. It was 25 million and stuff like that. It was large. My guess is it's not fully decided at this point, and we'll see. But I mean, I think it'll be, some of it will be the legislature, some of it will be, the RFP for the assessment was online. I looked at it. It was with the procurement office. There's a number like everything the state bids, and you can go in and look at it. They have to have sample questions and all that by around the 1st of May. They told us, which is another interesting thing, Mr. Zago and I, that there will not be a separate writing assessment under the new contract. Now, we have a writing assessment coming up in February of this year, and we've had them for several years now doing that, but they're not going to do a separate writing system. They will be pulling writing scores from the answers on the other disciplines. Now, I'll tell you what that says to Don Odom. That says to Don Odom, multiple choice is not going to be what your test is going to look like. And very likely you're going to be looking at what's known as constructive response questions, and questions that require students to cite evidence and things like that. In other words, they're going to have to, it'll be different than saying A, B, C, or D, for a response. So, again, not having seen any of the questions or anything like that, but if they're abandoning writing and going to pull writing from other disciplines, you've got to have something like constructive response or something written out to do that. So,
weren't we anticipating the 2014 results, the results from this past spring, would give us the J-curve type of test scores where we expected, okay, these scores may go down a little bit because things have changed a little bit, but then they'll recover as we get more familiar with the test?
There was a little bit of that, but not much, because most, in general case, scores were up because the test was still the old SPIs. You haven't, the J-curve drop was to have occurred had we used Park for 14-15, the year we're in now. That was a term where you'd likely to see the J-curve drop with a different type of assessment. But since last year's test, the 13 and 14 test was still the old SPIs, you're not seeing a lot of drop. Now, what I am seeing, we can talk about this some more tomorrow night when we do the report card. One of the things that you did see across the state, there's a general rise, and you'll get to see Rutherford counties over several years. I typically will I'll do a 5-year, a 10-year back, and a 5-year, and a current year to let y'all see the pattern of how things are going. You're going to see that increase and that rise that's there. The value-added piece is a little bit tougher for the state, I think, now. I did talk to the Commissioner of Education. He said that the SAS people that does TVOS, and that's a North Carolina company too, actually, started, you remember, value-added started with Dr. Bill Standers at UT. And he went on, was employed off by SAS, which is, if you want to Google him, is an international, they do international consulting work, but they're a North Carolina company. But the norming of the tests we're giving now was like 2008, 9. And when you start getting out 4 and 5 years from your norming, then sometimes it inflates your scores, or your value added comes out a little bit skewed. I mean, I could show you graphs. I don't necessarily, I've gone in and actually graphed all the EOCs and all the TCAP from the teacher things to see how many 4s and 5s and 1s and 2. And you remember we made a comment earlier that in 6th grade English language arts, the number of 1-level teachers statewide exceeds the 3, 4, 5 put together. Not supposed to happen. It's supposed to be more of a bell curve, more average 3s, fewer 5s, fewer 1s. So it begins to tell you that some of the things the commissioner said, that we're getting so far from that norming that we're beginning to see some discrepancies in it. You know, testing and assessment is, it's a fluid environment somewhat when you look at it, because always teachers and schools get, if you put a set of standards out there and tell teachers teach this, they will teach it, and kids will learn it. You know, they'll follow that. And teachers have to pretty much follow what the assessment's going to be, because our kids are competing for scholarships at other places and things. So you've got to align yourself somewhat with your assessment piece to give your kids competitive advantage and edge when you do these assessments. So I can tell you what, as we've been going out and doing evaluations, what teachers are saying to me and administrators, you know, let's settle this thing, tell us what we need to teach, and get an assessment that matches what we're going to teach, and we'll teach it. But what we're bothered with is it changing.
So I guess I'm a little confused. I started my questions with, my understanding is that there is a disconnect between curriculum standards and assessment. I think what you've told me is maybe not so much because it got delayed, and so I still feel like that there is a disconnect between those two, but I'm not sure. Is there a disconnect between those two?
This test this year will be basically the LSPIs. The disconnect is that if you are now in your teaching, if your teaching now requires students to cite evidence, you require students to look at an author's position, read 3 scientific, say, statements from 3 different people, and say, is there a consensus or not a consensus, or why not? Our teachers are beginning to go to that, and one of the reasons why is because it's also on ACT and SAT. If you don't put the rigor and the thinking thing in there, the problem solving, so teachers are now teaching problem solving more than they ever have. But what you're seeing was basically on the assessment last year still predominantly multiple choice. So that's more of the disconnect now, is probably the teaching strategy versus the actual questions per se.
Okay, that teaching strategy versus assessment questions, does that responsibility lie with the State Department of Education or with the legislators who delayed Park introduction?
You know, again, you've got to have to make sure you've got the standards you want or whatever you have. But to delay the vote with the legislature, to delay that, meant that the assessment that the State Department of Education had talked about bringing in was off the table. So the only thing left was the questions that are left over from the pool of questions the state owned. But the legislature at the same time instructed them in preparation for 15-16, go out and bid a new testing thing, not aligned to the elephant in the room, the Common Core, not aligned to Common Core, but go out and go to a testing company to do that and create the test. So that was the one where they put out the RFP, where they did that information. And out of the vendors, there were a number of vendors in there. You know, ACT was actually bid on a test. Was one of the, I heard one of the top 5. They didn't let all of that out. I'm sure Pearson, McGraw-Hill. When I go back and think of the big testing companies across the United States, who is probably going to have the resources and the ability to create a test like that, it's the big companies typically that's going to have that ability. So, But anyway, it came out to be that the procurement office selected Measurement Inc. We just have to see now what happens if there's any other additional legislative action dealing with funding or whatever it is. If nothing happens, my assumption is it will be Measurement Inc. will create the test based upon whatever standards the state has. Now, we were told at this meeting, people at the State Department, because people say, well, what if standards change? They said the RFP was written that the assessment company must design the test to match whatever standard Tennessee has.
I guess at the end of a rather lengthy and still confusing discussion, and I don't know if you feel like it's clear, but I'm lost in what you're sharing with me. I understand bits and pieces and details, but I'm really trying to drive down to, is there a standard for curriculum, and is it matched with an assessment that tests that standard? And I don't think that those two are in full lockstep agreement at this time. I think that they are, my perception is that they are somewhere disconnected, that there was an intention that they be in step with one another, but through State Department of Education or legislative action or something, those have gotten separated to the detriment of our classrooms. And I just want to bring that point into some type of clarity in the presence of our legislators. I'm not sure I have the capacity and understanding, and I don't think I made any progress in your and my discussion or our work session here tonight in getting that to be able to make that point clearly. But it seems to be a critical element, toward effective education. Is there any truth to that?
As an educator, you want your assessment aligned to whatever you teach, because the purpose of the assessment is how well did you teach it, how well did the kids learn it. I mean, we do benchmark assessments all year long. We do things to see, so you know what kids need to go to intervention, what kids need remediation. You always want whatever assessment you're doing aligned to that. What are we telling Rutherford County teachers this year? We're basically telling them that in your process of teaching, and we did an alignment from our instruction department, took third grade English, fifth grade math, all of those disciplines like that. And we also took the state's old SPIs, because we know if we don't make sure that kids know those SPIs and our teachers doesn't cover those SPIs, then we're not only setting ourselves up for lower scores, but we're putting our kids at a disadvantage. So as teachers are supposedly teaching with additional rigor and this other, they are blending into those old SPIs and standards. But you have to realize another thing. At one time, Tennessee had 125, 130, 135 standards per grade per subject. You was getting up to almost one per day. But when they came back and reduced the standards to 25 or 30, embedded in that standard are several subset skills, which are really the old SPIs. You got what I'm saying? Like if you say somebody's going to do a long division problem, one of the easiest ways to do long division, when you take a look at that and you're looking at that divisor and your dividend and you're coming up with that quotient and all that, you're looking at that, you've got to multiply to put the number down there. Then you have to do a subtraction problem to subtract to get the difference, so you can go through the process again until you finish up with a remainder or it comes out even. That's those SPIs. You had to multiply, you had to subtract in order to do your final goal, which might be division. So very often when you see a standard, it includes many sub-skills beneath that. And that's not uncommon or forever.
I would be curious if any other board members have other thoughts about this or any other topic that you anticipate talking to the legislators about.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
I was just wondering if any of us have heard, because I did hear exactly what he said a minute ago about a more informal. I think the way it was put to me was, this is not a coat and tie affair. That's the way it was put to me. And have we heard anything about how this meeting, we had it here, it was a roundtable thing. I don't know I mean, do we know what kind of meeting it's going to be?
My perception from Chairman Campbell will be that, yes, we'll all be sitting around the table, intermingled with board members from our district, with the city school board, with our legislators. So rather than Rutherford County being here and Murfreesboro City here and the legislators, it'd be like sitting at a big kitchen table, and there'll be conversations since the city is hosting. I'm sure that Chairman Campbell will be emceeing, and hopefully everyone won't talk at the same time, but I perceive that we'll just go around the table and have conversational questions with the legislators at that time. And again, it'll be a relaxed, informal environment, but like Mr. Holliday stated, it could be aggressive at times. I know from our meeting with them the last time that we asked some things and we got responses that turned out to be different by the time the legislative year ended. So, I think whether or not it's going to be televised, I do not know that, but I'm sure the media will be there, and there will not be questions from outside sources, audience or media, to the legislators or to the board members at that time, maybe afterwards.
I think the city council also meets at night, and the TV will be there.
Probably so.
Now, I was also told there would be no public comment, period. But I want to word this very carefully, and I often say at the county commission, and I've seen you all do this, and if Ms. Moore asks a question, there's no need me asking it. So, what I'm saying? So I'm not saying that anybody should do anything, but I am saying this. I have some questions. And I want to look Senator Ketron in the eye when I ask him, or Mike Sparks or whoever.
Sure.
And and if we're not going to do that, I frankly got other things I can do with my evening. We're not going to swap ideas, and
I feel confident you're going to have that opportunity.
that's fine.
Ms. Moore?
Well, and that's what I was going to say. I mean, I understand, I think, where Mr. Holliday was coming from. I think, the explanation of it being informal was more of we want the environment to be relaxed, not so much that we don't have the ability to ask the hard questions of these legislators. I think we all have some on our mind. And to me, that's really one of the big purposes of this meeting. So I certainly don't think it precludes, the standards and the testing is something that's on my mind as well. And I think that's what this meeting is designed to do, just that the environment and the atmosphere is going to be not formal, like a board meeting setting sort of formal. Is that an accurate assessment?
When we had the meeting here, all the legislators were sitting here, and of course the board members were sitting there looking at them, and it was it gave you the impression of more of a question or grilling session, whereas this will be more, like I said, sitting around the kitchen table, asking questions, and as big families will, they will ask hard-pointed questions from time to time, and I certainly expect that to be the case. So.
You have a TSBA, legislative agenda, which, have y'all received that yet for this upcoming session? Murfreesboro City Board and you both are also members of it.
We were polled for those. We were polled at the fall conference, but the results of those polls and the adopted legislative agenda will be something in the state convention.
We'll probably have copies of that. I'll see if I cannot get a copy of that here before the 13th also. But there's going to be other things that we're going to want to talk to them about. Just tonight, what Mr. Snell said about there's really not a stick added to someone running a stop sign, on a bus. Those are, and I'm hopeful that maybe bringing this up tonight, that maybe members of the central office or our system will come up with some things like this. This was not something I was aware of. I thought running a stop sign on a bus was a huge deal. Yeah, okay, right.
That's the same thing as the cameras here in town. They have to be reviewed by a police officer, I think, before they can do anything there.
So those are things, and I don't want to hog this, but, Mr. Odom, tomorrow night, or maybe at another time, I guess I would like to know a little more in depth how the Common Core training that occurred over that 2 or 3 year period that we were so involved in having actual trainers, what did that do for us as far as our teaching technique or teaching methodology? How did that change, and how has that affected us? And one of our legislators have talked about equating and smart testing, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because that seems to be one of those controversial issues that's on the horizon that maybe everyone doesn't stand.
But the training that you're talking about was really more of a training to build rigor in questioning, citing evidence, teaching kids to take argumentative positions. It switched. Once upon a time, a lot of it was rote memory. I mean, it just really was. And so the process now, the way is more of developing analytical abilities in kids, or and that's teachable. How you can look at it, and then what is the author saying, and then do I agree or disagree with that? It's the ability to look at, you're not rote memorizing, other than dates, historical dates and certain facts and things like that certainly could be part of that, multiplication tables and that sort of thing. But if you're going to be, I can remember when it came out, and Angel, I'm going to quote you here. When she first saw some of it, she said that was one of the first things that you saw when you went to law school, was the process of being able to look at something. What was it you said at the time? Because I remember you saying that when you saw some of the teaching, the way that it was done.
Not the way I've learned my entire life. This is not the way we have been taught to think and approach education. And the presentation that we had on Common Core early on was exactly that way of thinking and that way of approaching learning. So a very much higher level to me.
It wasn't memorizing statutes and laws necessarily. It was analyzing, does this fit that or not fit that? I mean, it's just an attempt to get kids to think more deeply in those particular terminology. But it's still built upon standards, facts, SPIs, student performance indicator, whatever it is. I mean, they're still the backbone of it. But what it changed for teachers, you didn't really change the subject, but how you taught it was the difference, is what I'd say to you more than anything was what the training did. And most teachers I've talked to like that style, because they're doing close reading, they're doing inquiry thinking in the classrooms with kids, they're doing more partner, small group, y'all talk it over, read this, talk it over, what do you come up with consensus, what do you see in this, what do you see in that? That's the things that you're seeing different. If you go into a classroom, you'll see a different model. You do not see nearly as many classrooms with rows of chairs and the teacher standing at the front dispensing and doing that. You go into a lot of classrooms now, you'll find clusters of 4, 5 here and 4, 5 here and that sort of thing. It's really a little bit more project related, I might say.
Isn't that also reflected in the evaluation standards for the teachers? When we go in and evaluate a teacher, we're looking for those different teaching styles all included in a single lesson plan, and we're looking for the group effort portion of the class, the lecture portion of the class. Isn't that part of that as well?
Somewhat. I mean, if y'all would like a copy of that, Ms. Barnes, why don't we put in their folder a copy of a teacher evaluation form? What are the indicators? You might find it interesting.
My point there is, though, but that was legislative. The adoption of that higher standard in evaluation, or am I mistaken? Was that from Department of Education, or was that legislative?
It was a recommendation of the Department of Education went to the state board for action.
Okay, so not a legislative action.
Not typically. The legislature typically doesn't do that. I mean, it's typically, the charge goes to the Department of, just like for you. You know, I mean,
I guess my perception is the teachers sure blamed the legislators for the changes that were made to the teaching environment. And, you know, that is the more rigorous evaluation, the evaluation scale, the, you know, longer track to tenure, all of those kind of things. But none of that was legislation.
well, no, some of it was where this Department of Education came to the legislature and said, because tenure is the legislative thing.
Okay.
So they did have to go back to the legislature to say, to then get the change in that, which said, instead of after 3 years and reemployed, you have tenure, you now have to work 5 years, and you must have a 4 and 5 in your last 2 years to have tenure. And then once you gain tenure, if you drop to 1s or 2s 2 years in a row, you lose your tenure. Yes, that's legislative action. Who brought that to the legislature, or those changes, was basically the Department of Education.
Okay. And walking back the training that Wayne, Mr. Chairman, was talking about, that was summer of 13. Is that about right?
Gosh, we're 4 years, about 4 years. They started with kindergarten, first grade.
Yeah.
All of our 4th and 5th graders in Rutherford County have never seen anything but the current Tennessee state standards.
I guess that's where my frustration is with the legislative action that is, in essence, switching horses. For up to 4 years, we've been driving in a common direction with the evaluation of the teachers, with the increased standard for tenure, with the state standards, whether it's the Department of Education or the State Board of Education or the legislative action, all of those have been moving in a common direction. Ooh, I said that word common. But now, because of the legislative action that pulled Park Assessment out, even though there were some substantial reasons to question that, you know, it has us in a place. And I come back around to what a Rutherford County principal shared with me, that when they look at where does that child go in a classroom, that a child can experience a bad year. There can be a personality conflict, there can be, you know, some type of element, there can be a crisis at home, something can happen that child can have a bad year. But if that happens, it is this particular principal's paramount responsibility to ensure a good year to follow that, because the statistics will show 2 bad years in a row result in underachieving performance for the rest of their educational time, because they just get so far off track. And here we've been up to 4 years, and now all of a sudden the rope is frayed, we're not all pulling in the same direction, and our legislators have got to know the importance of that priority. I don't exactly know. I'm struggling tonight. It's why I brought it up in a work session, which is they handcuff us there that we can't talk outside of this except for, you know, sunshine law and such. Somehow we've got to get that point across to them. We've got to all pull in the same direction. They can't make up a new idea all on their own and then say, Department of Education, Rutherford County Schools, y'all figure this out because we decided it's so.
Can I interject something there? you know, that's what happens when we fast-track things, and I think that's kind of what's happening here. We put the cart before the horse. So now they gotta come back and they gotta analyze it and see what problems or what issues there are with this now, and it's gonna cost a lot of money. We wasted a lot of taxpayers' money here to prepare all these teachers across the state to get ready for this assessment, teaching to these standards, and it's useless, so, you know, what the answer is, I don't know. Who is responsible for looking at these assessments and making sure that they do line up with our standards and have the sole responsibility of proving that? Is that the Department of Education or?
Department of Education basically is the one that has to review it. So, like I said, the RFP, that was probably written by the Department of Education for the new assessment. The legislature simply told them to create a new one. That RFP is Department of Education. And so, again, what we were told, Mr. Dago and I were told, that the assessment must align with whatever standards Tennessee has. But they wrote this assessment, they wrote this contract, is it 3 years? I'm not sure. I mean, there's a time limit on it, but it also means if you change the standards, they're supposed to go back and adjust to it, to whatever those standards become. Now, how long does it take to turn around that model? You know, that's another issue sometimes. But apparently they've written the RFP to try to address whatever the standards turn out to be.
I think another thing that'll help, and I hope we get to it one of these days, that our legislative body will have more rapport with our local education. We all see it across the state that we have one of the best education systems. They ought to, my personal opinion, they ought to come to us or come to our director or our people here for information. You know, we've all got our views back to the Common Core. I really feel like overall, we took the steps, or Mr. Odom, Mr. Gill, whoever, took the steps to train our people. And I think what it's made our system that much better. And I think what the lapse is, a lot of these other counties didn't do what they're supposed to as far as training goes. And I think that right there got back to their legislators, and next thing you know, you got all the legislators fighting against this thing. And that's, now, as far as agreeing with the testing, I think there needs to be some fixes to it. But the concept, I think our system has did well in adjusting to it and everything. But I just hope our legislators will reach out to the people that they actually represent in this county. And I think it would help them an awful lot. And I hope that happens.
I will, between now and that meeting, will make sure that I have the TSBA issues brought to each of you. Don't forget, we have the continuing redundant issues each year of elected superintendent, statewide voucher, and untethered chartered schools too. So those issues continue to raise their ugly head each legislative year too. So maybe Mr. Odom, you and members of the central office can share with us some things that we don't experience on a day-to-day basis. You know, like the stop sign issue that Mr. Snell brought up that we can share with. Yes, sir.
I think a lot of legislative issues, I think they may be in the journal. That I just got one today, I believe. And,
did you get a hard copy?
Yeah, in the mail.
I've got it on the computer, and for some reason I cannot expand it.
Well, everyone may check that unless I overlook something, but it seems like I saw something in there.
That may be. Thank
2 or 3 pages worth of legislative issues.
We may borrow your copy to make copies.
In casual conversations with our legislators on the topic of statewide vouchers, I hear from some that there are areas of our state that just absolutely need that type of opportunity, and the case for it is so strong, and we're not doing this for Rutherford County, but we're doing this for other places where this does make sense. My response to that is, and I share this with my fellow board members, depending on, who has the opportunity to make the point, my thoughts are, you've already given the opportunity for a system to approach the State Board of Education and request a waiver. Make sure that that waiver opportunity includes the possibility of vouchers, and let those vouchers happen not with statewide legislation, even if it's statewide legislation that specifically says for this system, that system, this other system. When the legislature weighs in and passes something, it's only a court case away from being statewide adopted, because we can't have unfair practices. But if we do it under individual waivers for individual circumstances, then it can apply to those places where you say the need is so compelling, and yet it has no opportunity to come to a successful system like ours and starve or take away the resources that we so vitally need. It also will protect those good exclusive opportunities where parents are enjoying or taking advantage of some private education that may have a specific intent or desire for a religious influence or something like that. As soon as state dollars come in there, then that religious intent is in jeopardy, or any other specific intent. We go to the lowest common denominator when we come into government funding. So I think that those points are very important, and there's a responsibility for our Rutherford County legislators to represent Rutherford County circumstances, and that is a incredibly successful school system accompanied with some nice alternatives inside of our county that are healthy and doing well.
If you look at how much money a penny on the tax rate raises in some of these counties, I'm absolutely amazed at how they fund anything. Just compared to Williamson County, us, other places, and I assume that they are probably in desperate straits in some places, but there's no evidence to support it here, none. To add to what Mr. Hodge said a minute ago, I thought that was really excellent, and he's right on it. I didn't, and this really speaks well. I talked to two high school principals, one this summer and one last week, and we were just talking about, the future and all those things, and Common Core in particular, and both of them said almost, this was not, obviously not the same conversation, almost exactly the same thing. Jeff, I don't care which way we go necessarily, this faculty is ready. That's two of our high school principals. I haven't talked to the rest of them, so I don't know. But that speaks pretty well for past training, Mr. Hodge, absolutely. And you get ready to close on some humor, Mr. Blair, I'm ready because I have something.
Okay. You're going to finish this up, is what you're saying?
Whenever you're ready.
Okay. Anybody else have anything else? Yes, Ms. Moore.
I'm sorry to drag this out, but I just wanted to point out, we were talking about the assessments and the process for picking a new vendor, I guess, if you will, to do that. And Mr. Odom was kind enough to have sent out a very detailed email back last Thursday, which was the 30th, about the whole process and how the RFP process was done. And there was also an attachment that has 250-something pages of that RFP, and it's pretty doggone detailed. So I don't doubt that they did a good job with creating the RFP and asking for the right feedback from the bidders. I guess my question is, and kind of goes back to, I think, something maybe Mr. Young may have touched on, and that is from the local involvement and the opportunity and the going back to entrusting your local boards to be perhaps in some cases a better assessor of those kind of things. In other words, the questions that should be asked, but also looking at the vendors that put their bids in to do these assessment trainings. Who is the procurement office, and is there any of that reach out to the local? I mean, this was mandated by the legislature from back in July, But my question is, where is the opportunity, or is there any, for people at the local level, your boards, your folks that understand their local systems, and the teachers to give feedback on the RFPs? Or is it just a, it's just a given that, hey, this is who was selected, bam, that's the end of it? Do we see the results of those RFP proposals and how they went through their decision-making process to come to the fact that they've selected this measurement?
They do not ask us to write, in writing the RFP or seeing it. It was interesting that some of the people, the State Department of Education said, that because it's such a hot potato, they didn't want, they helped write the RFP, but they didn't want to be tied to deciding the procurement, so they turned most of it over to the procurement office, or all of it's what they said. But I don't know on inside what happened, but they said they did not get involved in selecting the final people. I mean, they narrowed it to something like 5 and 3 or something, and then went down to.
Do you know how many organizations they actually had bid on it to begin with?
We had a list of those 5 that were narrowed down to, and of those 5, to meet the procurement standards of letting or awarding that bid, they chose Measurement Inc. to do that. All 5 of them met the state Department of Education's RFP minimum.
It may have been dollars and cents at that point. Who bid the
Typically,
cheapest?
that's.
I don't know, but typically that's what happens.
Dollars and cents. And one thing is like Mr. Odom said, we have a history of working with Measurement Inc. too.
And I assume that history's been good. I'm assuming that history's been good.
It has been. It's been our writing assessments, and they've been very forward. We've actually had Measurement Inc. people come and work with our teachers in our annual summer 2-day training. We've had Measurement Inc. come in and volunteer, and their staff members here to spend time with our administrators. It was about 3 years ago, I think, Mr. Odom.
On constructive response questions, because I attended it myself. How do you teach kids to get ready for constructive response? Now, folks, they do constructive response all over this country.
And they did that.
Especially if you go up in the Northeast, Massachusetts, which is supposed to be one of the best. In fact, if you've got time and want to fool with, you can go in and Google constructive response assessment. Just type that in. And what you'll do, it'll take you to certain state tests in different places, but a lot of those in the Northeast, Northwest, and all. And I think some of that is kind of just now coming to the South to that level.
They've been very good at meeting their timelines. There's been a couple of potholes, I would say, in providing some information here and there, but that anytime you're working with as many states and as large companies, that there's going to be a couple of potholes.
Sure.
But they've always met their timelines.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else before we let Mr. Jordan share with us his thoughts, his final thoughts, or our final thoughts?
I did get an email Saturday afternoon from a retired Rutherford County educator that said, Jeff, I just want to remind you that Common Core has emailed me and you are to turn your clock back 3,600 seconds. If an apology is necessary, I'll make it now.
Well, we'll just do a continuation tomorrow night. How's that? Anything else for this board? Okay, we'll see you tomorrow evening. We're adjourned.